Welcome to Watchmen Club Session 1. It's here. It's finally here. I'm so excited to be sharing this with you guys. Thank you, everyone, for showing up today on Twitch. Thanks to everybody who showed up at my appearance yesterday at House of Secrets. That was super fun. I hope you guys are as excited as I am. Obviously, I'm excited. I'm tripping over my words. So let me start off by giving you an overview of what we're going to be doing today. First, we're going to start with a recap of issue number 1. Then we're going to talk about the 9-panel grid that is employed in the artwork by Dave Gibbons, the artist. Then we're going to talk about background elements and how they are pacing this comics reality with real life in 1985. Then I want to talk about my best lines and favorite interactions of issue number 1. And then we are going to talk about issue number 2. We're going to recap issue number 2, talk about everybody's memories of the comedian during the funeral. And after that, we're going to end on Under the Cape supplemental. I hope all of you did not get lazy on me and read all those words at the end of the comics. Under the Cape supplemental was split into 2 different parts, and so you were supposed to read both of those. So I hope you did, because we got some stuff to talk about today. Also, Beans has showed up. Oh, what a lucky omen. Oh, to have a little Bean just hop up into our Watchmen Club Session 1. Hello, Beans. You're so cute. Let's start with recapping issue number 1. So it's October. It's 1985. The NYPD are investigating the murder of a man named Edward Blake. There is a costumed vigilante out on the loose, and get out of here, Beans. He's making an inquiry on his own, Rorschach, and he discovers that Blake is the comedian, who is another costumed hero, although he is sanctioned by the U.S., whereas Rorschach is working outside of the law. And Rorschach believes that he may have uncovered a potential conspiracy to kill costumed heroes, and he goes about warning / questioning his former colleagues, his retired colleagues in the costuming biz, in the costume adventuring biz. First, he goes to Dan Dryberg, who is Night Owl 2. We see him talking with Night Owl 1, who's still around, Hollis Mason, who is the one who wrote Under the Hood, the supplemental that you end up reading. And so you have him meeting up. And then after that, and of course it doesn't go well. Like Rorschach is not a fun guy. Like, you don't want him showing up at your house, you know? Like, he's a problem. He's a chaos being, you know? He's what he is. So he shows up, and of course it's like, oh gosh, you know, makes Dan start feeling bad. And then he goes and shows up at Adrian Veidt's crazy, you know, penthouse business empire place. He is a retired costume guy who's now like CEO of his own company. And finally, he goes to visit Dr. Manhattan and his lover, Lori Juszczyk. It's going to give me a minute. Silk Spectre 2. And after that, then you have Lori and Dan. They go out. They have dinner. They catch up because they all used to be a part of the costumed hero business together. They talk about Rorschach, laugh about him throwing people, you know, down down an elevator shaft, and reminisce. Now, during this issue, we learn that there was a Keene Act. So this act effectively retired costumed vigilantes, heroes, and only the comedian and Dr. Manhattan were sanctioned by the U.S. government. So it's like, it's federal, no more heroes, you can't do this unless the U.S. government says it's okay. Otherwise, like, we're going to find you. Like, don't do it. Like, it's illegal. And so Rorschach is like the only one who's continued to operate outside of the law and didn't listen and didn't retire. Everybody else has retired, and I love that Ozymandias like retired like before the Keene Act, because he knew it was gonna happen. He's such a whatever. We'll talk about that in a minute. Like I said, Night Owl 1 is still kicking around. He wrote this book, Under the Hood, which is a tell-all about his experiences as a costumed adventurer. And in this book, he asserts that during his time with the Minutemen, his fellow teammate, the comedian, was caught unsuccessfully trying to rape the other teammate, Silk Spectre 1, Lori's mother. And we also find out during this issue that Rorschach is a crazy person, and he will go break people's fingers for kicks, you know, like he's totally like a super nuts guy. Fascinating character. And so, again, going back to Adrian too, it's like, I love when Adrian's just like, oh, well, if you remember, I quit 2 years before the Keene Act even made it necessary. You know, I quit on my own volition. And Rorschach's like, yeah, dude, good timing. Like, I knew you knew it was coming. Like, I'm not stupid. Like, I get it. You know, I thought that was like really cute. But all right, let's move on to the 9-panel grid. Okay. And this is something that you may not be consciously aware of. A lot of people aren't. And that's why it's so brilliant. Is Dave Gibbons, the artist, suggested when they were first getting everything together about doing a 9-panel grid. And like, what is a 9-panel grid? Well, you know, it's the grid that's pretty much throughout this whole thing. It's like, you always have 3 rows, you know, like the most panels you can put on a page is 9, and that's it. You can take up a whole row or a whole whatever, but it's always going to stay in this 9-panel grid format. You'll have a couple, you know, for dramatic effect, you'll take up 2 rows, things like that. But this is something that is employed throughout the entire novel. I mean, this is like the whole deal is done in this 9-panel grid style. And that style was a conscious decision on the part of Dave Gibbons. And he was the one who suggested it to Alan Moore. He had said on Twitter, he confirmed this on Twitter, he said that by suggesting this 9-panel grid, it would give Alan greater control, and its restrictions would challenge him to compose more creatively. And it's such a subtle like piece of like artistic genius to do this, in my opinion, because it like perfectly paces out your comic. Like immediately you have this pacing that's set up in the reader's minds, you know, and it's like hypnotic almost. Like it very much sucks you in. It sucks you in so much that you don't even notice what's happening, and it sets this really great, almost cinematic like pace, in my opinion, for the graphic novel. And also, I just want to say, like, props to an artist who is like, okay, sure, this, like, I'm going to suggest this. This is harder on me to do, but I know it's the right thing to do because we're making a really crazy piece of art, and, like, I want to make something that's, like, some next level shit, and I also am down to challenge myself, you know? Like, this is harder on me to do it like this, but I think we should do it like this because it's going to be so awesome. And I think that is really awesome. Like, that sort of stuff just is my favorite. Like, I love, that's how much thought went into this. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't take into account when you see things like, you know, before Watchmen or Doomsday Clock. And it's like, look, I can guarantee you that the amount of thought going into those do not match the amount of thought and care that went into this. Because this was, like, you had the editor, Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons, and John Higgins, the colorist, and they worked very, very closely together. You know, you had these 4 men, and really the editor wasn't really, like, on their nuts about it. Like, they, like, did whatever. But you had these, like, really dedicated artists all coming together, like, all trying to make something that was, like, really intense, you know? And that's why it's so good, is because you have all these artists, like, challenging one another, challenging themselves, like, trying to, like, just working at the top of their game. Like, it's just so phenomenal, and that's what sets this apart, and that's what sets apart a lot of amazing artwork for me, you know, is if you look at the artists and how they created it, it's like you'll find the same story over and over again, where it's like they're challenging themselves to do crazy stuff because they actually care. It's not just, we're making this to make a buck, you know, like that's not driving this. And so, all right, so not only do we have the 9-panel grid going on, we also have these little background details that like perfectly pace the Watchmen's reality with real life in 1985, the reader's world, our world. And they just, like, I love how Alan and Dave take like little bits of our reality and infuse it like into this narrative and into the story, into the art, into the text. The first issue especially is setting up and reflecting the tensions and fears that were going on in real life 1985. I mean, kind of just like now, there was a lot of nuclear fears going on. There was a lot of tension between the Soviet Union and America. There was a lot of that stuff going on in 1985, just like it is kind of today. And so in Watchmen, they really go about trying to put that, which has actually happened in real time, into this 1985, parallel 1985. And they do an amazing job of it. Like, first thing, I got a few of these to show you. I'm so excited. Let me go to page 9 here. Okay. Let's see here. No. Page 9. Okay. So even on our first page here, okay, we're told first thing that this is October 12th, 1985. You know, this is 1985, guys. Like, that's the deal. So that's a big one. They really, because this came out in 86. So this is like, oh, this is like a year ago, you know. And people remember what was going on a year ago. Now on page 10, you have this detective right here. And he's like, oh, hey, that guy's shaking hands in the picture with Vice President Ford, you know. It's like, okay, so here we have Vice President Ford being talked about, which was someone who was a vice president in our real world. We have, let's see, 13. I love this. It's like meltdowns. There's this little thing. It's like meltdowns. And it's like just a little ad on the building with a mushroom cloud, but just to like, that's on the minds. That's like it's just graffiti on the side of a building. It like puts those images in your mind. On 18, there's a lot of really good stuff. I really enjoy 18. These first two panels are just so fantastic. Because you have, you know, Buick, 1986. And then in this little corner, there's like, Russia protests U.S. advance in Afghanistan. We also have our first ad for Nostalgia, which is Veet's line of perfume. So that's also in there, like up here. That was a really good one. And let's see here, 18, 22. Oh yeah, and if you read on this, like, on this guy down here, like just this little newspaper, it says, Congress approves lunar silos. You know, so it's like, oh, they got lunar silos going on. Congress is approving things. It's just like setting up all this stuff. It's really cool. And then this one was, you know, this one's a little bit easier to find. But you have this right here, and it's like doomsday clock. Nuclear doomsday clock stands at 5 to 12, warn experts. And then you have all these like toys around it, you know, and it's like, oh, so like there's all this nuclear tension going on. And all this shit's just in the background. You know, like they're not, like they're being chill about it. They're not like shoving it down your throat, but it's like really perfect. And even later where we have, on 32, it's like we have Rorschach going by 4 more years with Nixon. And you're like, oh, so even though this is similar to our 1985, it is different. Like, it's different. Like, Nixon's still trying 4 more years in the 80s. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So it's like perfectly setting up all this stuff without being like in your face about it, which I think is really cool. It's very subtle, you know, it's masterworks here. This is how like people who know what the fuck they're doing do it, you know? Now, next up, let's talk about my best lines, my favorite lines in the issue. There are a couple things that really cracked me up. Like on page 12, the cop that's talking about Rorschach, you know, when they're like leaving the crime scene. And he's like, he's crazier than a snake's armpit. And I was just like, a snake's armpit? That would be crazy. They don't have any fucking arms. Like, how crazy would that be? Like, I laughed out loud. Like, I just want to call someone crazier than a snake's armpit. Because that's so absurd. Like, that's such a fucking stupid thing. But it really cracked me up. Also, I loved Rorschach's joke on page 19. Where he's like he's eating in Dan's kitchen, you know. Eating these beans, and he gives Dan the button, and he's like, oh, you know, like, check out this button. And Dan's like, what is this stain? Is that bean juice? And then in this panel, he's like, that's right, human bean juice. Haha. Like, it's just like, oh man, Rorschach made a joke? That's pretty funny. I mean, it's like, you see him, yeah, I don't know. I like Rorschach making jokes. It's like really funny. And also human bean juice makes me laugh too. Like, because human being, it's a perfect pun. I really like that. And then I really enjoyed, and this isn't like funny one, but on page 25 you have Adrian Veet talking with Rorschach, and Adrian is talking about talking to Rorschach about the comedian, and he says, and accuses the comedian of essentially, he said, the man is practically a Nazi. And Rorschach said he stood up for his country, Veit. He never let anybody retire him, never cashed in on his reputation, never set up a company selling posters and diet books and toy soldiers based on himself, never became a prostitute. And if that makes him a Nazi, you might as well call me a Nazi too. And it was just like, ooh, you know, like Rorschach's just like calling him out. And then, you know, just a like from Adrian, which is like the perfect response from him, like the perfect political, diplomatic response from that guy. But I think it's interesting that Adrian Veit is the first person to call someone a Nazi in the graphic novel, which we'll talk about later. More on this later. Also, loved giant Dr. Manhattan intro on page 28. Let's just see that. Oh my gosh, look at that giant cute butt. It's so great. I love, it's just it immediately, you know, how topsy-turvy crazy this world is. Like, it's like, whoa, this guy's nuts. Like, he's just hanging out and making experiments and really huge. Like, okay, cool. I thought that was really cool. And then at the end, you know, you have Dan and you have Lori, and they're reminiscing. They're catching up. They're getting dinner. You know, they used to be in this crazy game together, and they're talking about Rorschach and how he threw this guy who was like wanted people to choke him or something, like threw him down a elevator shaft when this like pervert was just trying to get Rorschach to play pervert games with him. And then they start laughing, and Lori's like, "Oh man, there don't seem to be so many laughs around these days." And Dan's like, "Well, what do you expect? The comedian's dead, you know." And it's just like such a perfect way to end this perfect first issue. Really great, because like, okay. So here's the thing about Alan Moore, and we've, you know, I've mentioned this. He is into, you know, occult ideas, archetypes, tarot, like magic, all sorts of weird stuff. And so I would assume that Alan Moore would know that, okay, so comedian, well, what is a comedian? Well, they used to be just called clowns, you know. But what is a clown? A clown is a fool, somebody that you laugh at, you know, somebody who's stupid, who does stupid stuff that makes you laugh. And at the beginning of the tarot deck, there is a card called the Fool card, and it's a 0, actually. It's not a 1, it's like 0 card. And this card is a symbol for all potential. But on this card, you have a man, and he's got like a little bindle, and a dog is like, oh, and he's just not paying attention. And then there's a precipice, like he's walking like right towards a precipice, like he's gonna fall off this motherfucking cliff. And likewise, in this comic, you have the comedian, you know, who could be considered the Fool card, and he takes a plummet. Like, he actually does take a dive. Like, he falls off that and I was like, oh, I totally spotted that this time around. I was like, yes, like, I totally see that. And when he does, his death, his plummet into this precipice and dying, sets into motion all of this chaos, you know, like this whole story is built on this man's death, this man's plummet. And the thing to remember is that wherever there's death, there's also rebirth, you know? So it's like you have this death symbolizing the end of the old and the beginning of the new. And then since you also have all of this like really great imagery about nuclear war and like fears and tensions and world war and all this stuff, it's like it really makes it feel like you're in an apocalypse, you know? And like he's kind of this sign of the apocalypse, you know, is like when the comedian's dead, you know, it's like, oh, everything. It's like, oh gosh, like what's gonna happen now? Yeah, I just, like issue 1 just really knocked my socks off. I thought it was really fantastic. I haven't read this in like 10 years. So, I mean, I've had 10 years to get way smarter. And now I'm like, oh, this is even better this time. Like, I love it when you can revisit a work of art and then get more from it every time. You know, the smarter you get, you know, like the smarter it gets.
It's also well known for its rereadability.
Yes, the Watchmen is definitely well known for its rereadability. So, all right, so let's move on to recapping issue number 2.